Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's another episode of LMTV Live. This one is special only because there's no adult supervision. For whatever reason, Ocam guy is not here, and so we're going to have some fun. So today, first of all, let me introduce my two good friends, and fellow panel member, Paul Offord. Many of you know. Hi, Paul. Hi. And also Chris Greer, and Chris Greer is getting ready for another year of Shockfest. And,
hey, Denny.
And nice actually getting out of where are you now? Panama or Costa Rica? I forgot.
I'm in Costa Rica.
Oh, Costa Rica, that's right. And we have two special guests today. We have Steve Brown. Someone that I actually know for almost a decade, working in different capacity. And actually, Steve, I hate you because you haven't aged a day. I don't get this.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same for the past 10 years. So yeah, thank you. Well, I'll take that as a compliment.
And then Steve now works for, when I knew Steve, and correct me if I'm wrong, you used to work for Network Instruments, right?
Yep, that's very correct. I used to work for
another company, and we were kind of frenemy in a way, right? Yep. We had some product that overlapped, and we compete a little.
That's correct.
And you brought with you a friend whom I haven't met before. So why don't you introduce?
Sure. So I'd like to introduce to the LMTV world Ward Cobleigh, who is product line manager for Viavi's SaaS-based network performance management solution called Observer Live. We'll be getting into that a bit. And so without further ado, Ward Cobleigh.
Okay.
Hey, thanks, Steve. Denny, you and I have something in common, Steve, but it's for a completely different set of reasons.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, I only mentioned one reason, so we might have more in common. But now, Steve, I'm going to turn the podium over to you and let you introduce your solution. But I just one word of warning.
Yes.
Paul is our man with the number 2 pencil. All right, so he's the man that's taking notes. So he's going to ask you a bunch of questions at the end of this. So be careful.
Excellent. Yep. So I've got Paul and Chris to keep me honest, and Denny obviously to chime in as you want. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and share. I think something that'll be of interest. So today, as promised, with the introduction for anybody who might be paying attention. And how do my slides look? Does it look off a little bit, or am I sharing it correctly?
We haven't seen your slide yet.
Okay, 1 second. Okay,
yeah.
1 second. Okay, then I know exactly what to do. Okay, boom, and then I will go here, and I'll go share screen. Okay, and I'll go right, and then that should hopefully work and bring up hopefully the screen sharing. Are you able to see then the screen share, or?
We just have to see a still view at the moment.
Do you see my face, or do you see?
Oh, hang on. Things are changing.
Okay. I think that what we're talking about then is delay that's due to me being in Minneapolis.
No, actually, we have same problem as what we had before, which is we're not seeing your screen sharing.
Interesting. Yeah. Let me just go ahead and just talk to these slides rather than
okay. Yeah, we could do that.
Yeah, that's going to be. I really don't need people waiting around just for me to iron out kinks and technologies. I'd rather just kind of dive into things. So as I talked about, and as the title, using synthetic testing to improve packet analysis suggests, there are a lot of things that are going on that I think are causing people to look at not just packet analysis as the end-all be-all, but looking at other forms, other flavors, whether that be NetFlow logs, or as I was pointing out, synthetic testing to really improve what they can do with packet analysis. And what I was going to dive into was really understanding the big subject, or the big 800-pound elephant in the room, of cloud environments, and how this kind of hybrid IT construct, that mix of on-premise and cloud is impacting network engineers. And so I guess with that, before we kind of started, Ward, if you want to give a definition of synthetic testing, so that way I'm not just talking about two words that may not normally go together as a part of people's vocabulary, I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah, an official definition, but I think a lot of people use active testing and synthetic testing synonymously. So what we're talking about is, instead of passively capturing packets or capturing flow records or polling for data, we're actually inserting data, data that we control, and we're so it's the same every time, and it runs at a predefined interval. So what you have is a methodology for controlling exactly what you're going to monitor, instead of monitoring in the wild, if you will. So you're going to actively insert some, and then you're going to capture and interpret the results.
Got it. And I think that kind of level sets everybody in terms of just actively being able to emulate user experiences with critical services, not necessarily on cloud, but can also be on premise, for the purpose of understanding how exactly are they experiencing critical services without having to have users there. And where I think this becomes important is just a couple of stats that I think getting some reflection on would be good. I've been working with analysts over at Gartner, and back in December of 2017, they had a room full of network engineers, and they were asking them what is their ability to monitor cloud environments. And probably not surprising, 53% of them said that they were blind to what happens in the cloud. Another 32% said that they had solutions in place to monitor, but had significant gaps of visibility. And I think that what we know is that while network operations teams are probably most likely out of the loop on decision making, the user experiences and user complaints still go back and fall right in the lap of that network engineer or that network manager. And so when you think about it, 80% having some sort of huge visibility gap, that can be quite a challenge. And I wasn't sure, Chris, as you're talking to people out and you're educating on Wireshark, whether that's something that you're also hearing and seeing as a struggle that people have.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. Anytime cloud comes up, it's the struggle of how do you monitor it, because the thing with packet capture is you just have to have so much instrumentation in so many places. And a lot of times anymore, those are places you don't even control, like the whole coffee shop airport example. So yeah, people are talking about it.
Yep. And then Paul, I wasn't sure if things are similar over in EMEA in terms of Europe with deployment to the cloud and having to deal with that challenge of visibility out, and whether it be public or SaaS-based cloud offerings.
Certainly, if you're in, obviously the problem with cloud is you're getting higher and higher levels of abstraction. So if you take AWS, for example, you might be running a service on an EC2 instance, in which case you can perhaps run some packet capture for that instance. Then we come up the next level, you might be running it in a container. At the moment, containers run on the EC2 instances, so you're okay. But AWS have come up with this concept of Fargate, which is going to abstract the user even further from the underlying infrastructure. And then you've got things like Lambda coming along, where you just run code. And you're getting further and further away from the underlying infrastructure. So that is certainly a challenge that we've seen growing. Yeah.
Great. And I think that kind of challenge is echoed in actually the next question that Gartner had asked. And it was, are you satisfied with monitoring data you get from cloud providers? And overwhelmingly 62% had said not at all. And I don't think that, reflecting on this, talking to some of our larger customers that we have, that the approach that cloud vendors like AWS take is usually one of providing more of an infrastructure or cloud infrastructure centric view of, how is my CPU utilization, what's my compute, my network, my storage, how is all that performing? And I think that probably part of that challenge is, how does a network engineer take these infrastructure views and turn that into something that's meaningful for them to actually assess, how is performance overall, and then to take that a step further, how do you equate that to some sort of user experience? And I think that's a huge challenge, frankly, for network engineers.
I think the thing is that there is a gap, because even if you a lot of the cloud, or a lot of the customers we deal with that have got cloud, public cloud, or even private cloud solutions are running APM type solutions in those environments. And the APM solutions now obviously have a lot of real user monitoring at the far end, but there is this big gap in the middle between the user's desk and the cloud, or the cloud infrastructure. And the APM solutions don't typically help with that big chasm. And that also coincidentally brings up a number of demarcation lines between who's responsible for the desktop, who's responsible for the LAN, who's then responsible for the ISP, who's responsible for the cloud infrastructure. And so sorting out who might be causing a problem is a pretty big challenge.
Yeah, I think that actually raises a couple of good points in both the ability to be able to assess what that performance is, and then also when you understand where that domain might exist, who do you talk to? Because these roles for troubleshooting are changing rather rapidly.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And then the other thing I think that's also interesting is how this change in terms of the access, the visibility that we used to have in terms of troubleshooting, how that's evolved over time. And then another piece kind of concurrently that I was bringing out was there's an analyst group in the United States called Enterprise Management Associates, EMA. They do a fairly large, comprehensive network management. They call it a megatrend study, where they literally ask about everything, including the kitchen sink, of network managers and network teams. And one of the questions that they'd asked that I was going to draw out was just asking the question of which of the following data sources is your organization using for managing network availability and performance monitoring. And they asked this over time. And so we have results from 2014 as well as 2016. And what you see is that back in 2014, probably not surprising, log files and SNMP were the top two sources, along with APIs. And now what you see is the rise of packets up to the top, coupled with a significant rise of synthetic testing up to the top as a way to, there's a real change where you have packet inspection side by side with synthetic testing side by side with flow data as really the chief ways to analyze performance. And I think that part of that is, people are grasping for where do I go for answers, and what data source is actually going to provide me with the intelligence that I need. I wasn't sure if that's something else that you've seen, as well as whether there have been interest maybe in different data sources rather than just going right to the logs. Maybe they go somewhere else.
Definitely in our case. So, for example, we've migrated all of our systems into AWS, our internal systems. And we recently had a performance issue on one of our systems, and we had to combine looking at CloudWatch, which is Amazon's, battery of tools, with packet capture. And I also have a colleague who looked at a problem for a customer using Splunk instead of packet capture, because we didn't have any packet capture. And so, yeah, I think the challenge is, I think there are two issues. The first one is that as people start to migrate more systems into the cloud, their skill levels, their internal technical skill levels are going to diminish, because you do not need a server engineer who builds servers day in, day out if you can spin one up at the press of a button. So that's the first thing. And I think that could map into network engineering as well, if software-defined networks lives up to its promise and its drag and drop provisioning and all this stuff. And so I see that you're going to need people who can see across the technology stack. If you go across, maybe go down, but through this technology stack, and can combine these different data sources, like packets, like logs, like other trace data, even, for goodness sake, dumps maybe.
Yeah. And I think that this actually might even speak to the different way that we've been, Viavi, formerly Network Instruments, we've had our head really into capturing all the traffic, and that's kind of been one of our key points, and certainly why people, customers, come to us as we've been looking out into clouds, remote users, and different types of use cases that we'll get into. I think, Ward, you might be able to speak better than I to the changes that have been taking place at Viavi from a solutions perspective in helping people reach out and attain visibility and problem isolation capabilities in the cloud.
Ward, you need to unmute yourself first.
Rookie mistake. Sorry, guys. Thanks, Denny. Steve, I guess a couple things I would listen to the customer. So a couple things we've heard from a couple customers, just anecdotally. We have one customer, it's a very large financial institution. They had 70,000 Lotus Notes users that they were moving from their on-premise Lotus Notes solution to Office 365. And so the solution they had architected for instrumenting and monitoring that on-premises solution no longer gave them the same visibility that they once had. So it spoke to the need to have an additional element of visibility. They still needed their data center instrumentation. They still had 1,500 other applications, many of which lived on-premise. So they weren't looking to replace anything, but they were looking to restore trust in that particular situation. Talked to another customer recently, a worldwide company with about 60,000 employees, and they said their shift has been pretty dramatic. It's gone from premise in terms of the application architecture, 80% on-premise to 20% cloud. It's flipped. So now it's 20% on-premise, 80% in the cloud. So again, they still need the legacy solutions they've always had, but they came to us and said, well, what about the fact that I need to now monitor the end user experience for things that are no longer within my control? They no longer live within my four walls. And so, that took Viavi down a path of saying, well, what can we do to provide a more comprehensive visibility for customers that are seeing to the cloud, or even in this case now through the cloud as they move from cloud provider A to cloud provider. And so that was definitely a gap we were trying to help address there.
Chris, there aren't enough people out there who understand how to read packets anyway, are there?
Yeah, I'd say anymore, I think one of the things that people are facing as well as just speeds and feeds get bigger and faster, going to like 100 gig in the data center, is now you're just dealing with just packet overload. How do you, even if you can capture everything, how do you make heads and tails of it? Even if you do have that access, or even if you do a local capture, if you have something, an important service that's sitting in the cloud, a lot of times if you're capturing it on your side, everything's encrypted. So again, you're struggling to get useful data from the packet level once you start to migrate things. So yeah, it's a struggle.
Yeah, I think one of the things about synthetic transactions, and I must admit, in the past, I was more of a believer in measuring the real deal. But one of the challenges with trying to pull out the correct packets, as Chris was just saying, out of gigabytes of data, is that oftentimes the user, you can't even find out at what time of the day the user had the problem. Whereas, of course, with a synthetic transaction, you've got a log, and the log says, at 15:22:06, we got a response time of 15 seconds. And I can go and find that in the data. And that is attractive, because I find that there's a general reluctance from the IT department to get too involved with the business and talking to the users anyway, which is slightly disappointing. That's not, I don't want that to reflect on all our customers, because that's not true with all, but there is certainly some reluctance in some of them. And it's also quite difficult because of the geographic spread and time zone problems and all those sorts of things. So it's a bit of a challenge. So if you can get more definitive timestamps for problems, that's got to be good.
Yep. I think that I see that kind of going part and parcel with just, no different than whenever you are relying upon humans to account for any sort of memory or thing that they need to recall. There's a huge amount of subjectivity, and with non-IT inclined users, I think that becomes even more problematic. So the question becomes, how do you rule out subjectivity? How do you have a frequency that's enough that you have, comparative results? And I think that that's part of the value of synthetic testing. Additionally, Paul, exactly what you had said with the how do I know when to go to the packets? And that's the challenge. Whenever you're trying to drink from the fire hose, how do I portion off only that portion that's relevant? And I think that that's, again, where synthetic testing can help with any sort of performance management, because if you know at what time something occurred and there's no subjectivity to it, because we're always running the same sort of test, whatever that test might be, at least you can know with a certain degree of authority, you can start to narrow down that scope, which I think is really the chief challenge of any network operations team, is how do I begin to narrow down the scope or the time frame that I care about, and then, additionally, the activities that I care about.
Sure. Okay. I agree.
Yeah. So I think if you would like to, Ward, I think it would be a good idea to start to go and introduce people to the synthetic testing solution that we actually have available for trial for anybody on Love My Tool watching, listening, and to kind of delve into the release of Observer Live that we brought out to the world in February, and to see if that works.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Let's see if we can get my screen share to work any better than. So it says I'm sharing now. Do you guys see the Observer Live user interface?
It actually works, Ward. It actually works.
Outstanding.
By the way, Ward, just a comic relief. A real rookie mistake is when you forget to take the lens cap off. So you didn't do that. So
I do have a little Viavi branded privacy cover on my webcam. I can slide that over at any point.
Very often we have people come on and we can't see them, and then I would say, well, can you take that pink thing off the pink posting off your camera, because you can see the color. Go ahead.
Very cool. Well, hey, so just a couple things to explain what we're seeing here, folks. So this is the Observer. I want to just explain what some of the elements of the application are before we just dive in and start navigating through it. Key components. The application itself lives in the Amazon AWS environment. So you can think of this as whatever you want to call it, performance management or service assurance as a service. The application lives in the cloud. You access the application via your browser. What are the things that... Well, our data sources are what we call agents. Now, agents flavors, just very briefly. Our agents can be hardware agents, which are, a little purple box about the size of a pack of cigarettes, for lack of a better comparison, fits in our hand. You plug it into power, plug it into Ethernet. It then becomes the platform from active or synthetic tests that we talked about earlier. So that's one type of agent. Another, take that same functionality and virtualize it. We provide an OVA, a virtual appliance variation, that you can then load in your virtual environment as a virtual network function. Load it up on your ESXi server, what have you, and it then becomes the virtual agent from which we run our active tests. Third, the Viavi cloud agents that are pre-deployed around the world. Right now, with our initial release, which is still a very new solution, by the way, it was launched in mid-February, and our initial number of cloud locations is 16. So we have cloud load. That number will be continuously expanding based on customer demand. Those are agents that are pre-installed, pre-configured. They're owned by Viavi, but any user of the system can access them and use them for their own desire, for their own testing purposes. And then the fourth type of agent is one that's going for 24/7 monitoring. We have a troubleshooting agent, which is more of the ad hoc use model, where I'm a support person. I have a remote user. They're at a coffee shop, an airport, a hotel room, a customer lobby, and they're some resource and they're having problems. I can push an agent, a virtual agent, out to their location onto their laptop, pre-configured to run some kind of appropriate for what we're trying to troubleshoot, and then it runs that active test for a short period of triage and figure out the problem. So 4 types of agents: hardware agent, virtual agent, cloud agent, and troubleshooting agents. What do agents do on active tests? Synthetic tests, what we refer to as simply monitors. Okay, so our monitors fit into 3 different categories. We can monitor web-based services, so any web-based application, website, or web-based SaaS service, for instance, we can monitor. Second type of monitor is a simple network monitor, where we're monitoring the integrity of a network connection between point A and point B and providing key performance indicators for that network. And the third type of monitor is a voice monitor. So actually actively inserting voice calls, again, point A to point B testing, and being able to ascertain what the voice call quality would be that an end user would experience in calling from their location to. So those are the 3 types of monitors. Let's talk a little bit about what that looks like. So do we still see the UI okay?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So this is the first screen that you see in Observer Live, and this is the live screen. If the updates are coming through the way I hope they are, you see the live screen every minute based on the last minute of test results. We reprioritize the things that are on the live screen such that the most critical moves to the top of the list. So in this case, you can see we're well-known services, things like Creative Cloud, things like Office 365. We're monitoring them from numerous, and based on their performance, we're moving them up or down the list. So as things perform better, they actually list, and eventually off the list entirely. If they're performing just fine, they don't make it onto the live screen. Conversely, if they're having performance issues, they move up to the top of the list. So right now, Creative Cloud happens to be at the top of the list. You may see something that looks familiar in the middle of the list, which is LMTV Live. So why don't we take a quick look? It's moving down, catch it quick. Why don't we take a quick look at that one active test, that one monitor, and see what it looks like. What I did before we got on the session today is I created 2 active tests, one agent in California and the other test from a cloud agent in Virginia. So a web-initiated test and an East Coast initiated test. And both of them are actually testing to the YouTube channel where we're streaming LMTV right now. And so if I go to this first monitor to take a look at what we're seeing, since 11:36 Eastern time before we went on the air. And what I can see is, for the first 10 minutes or so, things were looking pretty good. Then we had a big spike and consistent pattern until about 12:40, and then things dipped down again. And so here's, to the value I think Paul was talking about earlier. This is just a nice way of understanding how we're able to anomalous events. I don't know yet what it was that happened at 11:46, but if I needed to really triage this and do some in-depth analysis, I know something interesting happened at 11:46, and I can focus my troubleshooting efforts there. But let's go a layer deeper and not just look at the overall end-user experience, but let's go down to the breakout. And what the breakout does is it takes the end-user experience and it decomposes it into various the client response times and the DNS resolution. So what I can see based on my color coding is the reason that we had an initial network, that's the light blue color. So I had an increase in my network latency 7 and then stopped at 12:42. But subsequent, after 12:42, what I'm seeing is a couple upticks in server delay. And so, if I wanted to kind of verify that, I could zoom in on that one particular piece. I could even turn off the network piece if I wanted to and just focus on server. And so I see that, for a brief period of time, half a second. So the idea is to be able to quickly ascertain what normal look thin that you can focus on. Is it the network? Is it client response? Is it the server itself? Now, what we're also providing at the same time, while we're doing these tests to understand the end user experience, is we're also just tracing the path between our in-cal URL, the L. And so if we see something that looks like it might be concerning as far as the network goes, or the network route goes, depth, and we can look at some route analysis. So for instance, if I pin this particular route that we took at 1247 and I compare it to the route we took at 1259, I can see they were both 16 hops. I can see in one case the last hop latency was about 3 milliseconds. In the other case, the last hop latency was just under 2 milliseconds. If I come down here, I can see that I actually wound up going to 2 different IP hosts. And so not only did my route change somewhat, but also the server that's responding to me changed, which is by design. And that's the where I'm going to focus in this particular situation. My route looks nice and consistent in terms of the number of hops, in terms of delay. If I were to focus on what's happening right now and trying to troubleshoot the here and now, I would focus in on this particular period of time, which we've already seen. My delay right now is more server delay related. So this kind of illustrates how you might use the tool to get a very quick underscore services forming. If we compare it, I'll just take a moment to compare it to something else most of you are familiar with. We've been monitoring lovemytool.com for a while now. We just started monitoring it from California earlier today, and we see that we've had a couple spikes in utilization. And in this case, we see that the server took but I'm all service for quite some time from another site in Ohio, and so for several weeks now, we can go and look at a longer term trend. And so here we see how this site has been performing over time. We can go to that same breakout, and when we see sort of this sawtooth pattern of spikes occurring, you can quickly go in and see, at 22:22, the server took a second to respond. At 22:27, 5 minutes later, about the same thing happened. 33, same thing. 38, same thing. 44, same thing. So we've seen this pattern over time where it appears that there's something going on that's causing server delay about every 5 minutes. And so if there were issues or concerns associated with this site, or if this were a web-fronted service, I would now know where to start. I'd know when the problem is occurring. I'd know it's something server specific, and so I could begin my analysis from there. Now, let's talk about what we don't know. So right during lovemytool.com, I know I have a pattern where every 5 minutes or so I get a spike in delay. Test, because that's the extent that the test goes. What's causing that data product running on that server every 5 minutes? Is it some kind of back-end lookup that the server in order to respond to my request? Those are the questions I can't answer simply by testing a single URL. But that's where being able to combine active test with passive packet capture is really a winning solution. I'll give you a quick real-life scenario that's holding in real time in Viavi land. We're having some performance issues with an internally hosted application. Exactly when the problem was occurring, because it manifested itself as a web page. That we were able to go capture all the back-end communication between the web server and the database that it was talking to. Single query that was 3 to 11 seconds to yield a response. And it was the ability to capture information on the back end right down to an individual SQL query that the role that active test played was being able to identify the problem and being able to quickly show the severity, the scope, the duration, and pinpoint where to look and when to look, and make it, to Chris's point earlier, if you've got terabytes of data, where do you start? That haystack is the size of Cleveland. How do you find the needle? Exactly where to look for that thing to make you much more efficient with those other tools that you have in your toolbox. So I've been talking for quite some time now. Why don't I just pause and see if there's any questions or anything that we need to clarify or expound on?
If I could make a suggestion, maybe Chris, you can chime in on this. You have a lot of experience with this piece of software, don't you? Observer Live?
I don't in terms of experience. I did get to visit these guys this last month and come up to speed on it a little bit. But yeah, was there, as far as like how it can, I can just mention what Ward just mentioned, how it complements what we're doing on the packet side. I think it really addresses some of the challenges I've seen from the packet side, in that just getting an accurate measurement of performance and being able to store that for any length of time is a really difficult thing at the packet level. I mean, if you think about how fast, even if we have a massive storage system, still in a lot of data centers today, that's only going to get you at best a few days. So I don't really have a basis for comparison if this is normal. Did I see this last week, last month, last quarter? And that's something that active test can help me to see. It just gives me that 100,000-foot view. And if I need to go to the weeds, great. But what I find is sometimes I don't need to go to the weeds. And a higher level active test can save me a lot of time digging through traces.
And Paul, any comment from you based on what you have seen so far?
Yeah, I have seen a demonstration of the product before, actually. Yeah, I think it's true what Chris said, that anything that helps us narrow down the search has got to be good. As I said before, it is quite difficult. It's quite a challenge to get accurate details about slow performance, and so timestamps and measurements from a user perspective are always useful. In fact, very useful. More than let's not underplay this. I was wondering about the challenges of dealing with things like proxies in terms of measuring the network delay. So, for example, we have customers that are Office 365 users. They have a proxy between the user and the outside world. In one case, they're moving to a cloud-based proxy, which is from Symantec, which is quite something, I think, quite a unusual. Well, I don't know, unusual. I guess Symantec think it's a commercially viable solution. And I was just wondering, how would you deal with those situations?
Yeah, it's a question that I'm actually glad you asked. The timing is perfect. In looking at right now, when we run an active test, as it goes directly from the originating agent straight to the destination URL. But in many cases, as you're pointing out, Paul, that's not how the end user experience works. They go release of Observer Live that is going to be, we're going to actually upgrade our system on Saturday, and so our users will see the updates, Saturday or Monday at the latest. We've introduced the ability to configure such that you can either run the test directly from the originating agent to the target URL, or you can specify that you want it to run through a proxy. Set up a test runs both ways, which I think will be very interesting, is test A, let's just run straight to my destination, Office 365 or office.com, and then test B, I'm going to run through Zscaler to get there, or I'm going to run through whatever my local proxy the end user experience.
Sure. Okay. So yeah. So I see what you mean. So basically, what you would be asking the customer to do then is you want to bypass the proxy for one set of measurements, but go through the proxy for another. And do I take it that you're going to recombine the results?
Are you guys still there?
Yeah, we can.
Oh, sorry, I lost your audio a bit there. I think you were asking if we were going to then combine the results after.
Yeah, I was just saying that you obviously you're going to do measurements bypassing the proxy and a measurement through the proxy. What happens then? Do you recombine the results to make sense of it?
So today, in the next
if you like, you can exit from the screen sharing so we could see your
face.
Yeah.
I don't know that you really. I don't know that you really want that, but as you wish.
I don't make judgment. It's my job.
Today, the way it works, Paul, in this next release that weekend is you would set up 2 monitors. One would be no proxy. One would be with proxy enabled. And then results but separate tests. So we're not smart enough in this release to do any kind of test A to test B and then summarize the results, but visually it should be pretty obvious. You'll see one test and you'll get an average latency or end user response time. You'll see the network path. You'll get another test and you'll see a different set of results. So you'll do the correlation manually, if you will, at least for now.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, makes sense. I'll shut up now, Denny. Get someone else to speak.
That's my cue to ask Steve to perhaps give a summary, and then we can
sure.
It's time to close the show.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, obviously, thank you everybody for being here. I think it's been a really valuable discussion in terms of presenting and understanding as we're seeing both challenging environments, more dynamic users, more traffic, whether it be on-premise or potentially out in the cloud, being collected, and always needing to come up with new strategies, new ways of getting to resolution. And obviously, there are always going to be more fires to put out, and addressing those fires is getting more complex. And so we see synthetic testing coupled with packet analysis is really being the way forward for greater accuracy in resolution, and certainly bringing people to quicker resolution, especially if you don't necessarily know how to read the packets or want to sift through the packets. How do you actually get to that problem and understand the time and the domain? And that's really where solutions like Observer Live come into play, become valuable. And would encourage everybody to on 2 things. One is definitely feel free to go out to observerlive.com. There's a free trial. You can kick the tires. It's fully functional, offering you all access to either virtual agents or the global cloud agents that Viavi already provides, so that you can actually see what intelligence we're providing. Additionally, with 2 of the speakers on the phone, on the line, Chris Greer and Ward Cobleigh, this coming Tuesday on the 22nd, there will be a webinar aimed at going more in depth on remote user strategy. So how do you diagnose remote networks? What sort of solutions are available to corroborate your gut feel that it's not your network, but their network? And how do you get that intelligence? Additionally, when it is on your end, how do you get that end-to-end visibility? And we'll be looking at a combination of both freeware tools as well as commercial tools to do the job. So understand that that's available. And by going to viavisolutions.com/enterprise, you'll see the sign up for that webinar if you want to catch more time with Chris and Ward. Additionally, observerlive.com for the free trial. And so, Denny, thank you very much for inviting us on your show. It's definitely been a pleasure.
Thank you, Steve, and thanks again to Ward and Paul and Chris. And so we'll wrap up the show, and we'll see you. I believe the next show is in 2 weeks, so we look forward to that. And thanks again, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right, everybody.